We all know that we are conduits of so much energy, and that many of us, as we've come into this lifetime, are incredibly empathic, sensitive, as we acknowledge ourselves as starseeds, light workers, crystalline beings, that we know that a lot of times it's a challenge to find ways to manage this high vibrational energy that we're holding in our body with the energy of how to manage this physical form. So today, I really want to welcome Kristen to be with us today. Kristen Braid is such a beautiful soul. So Kristen, thank you for being here. This is an honor. I just want to share a little bit about Kristen today. She's a health empowerment practitioner, utilizing many modalities, including kinesiology, somatic psychology, health coaching, fascia release therapy, trauma-informed yoga, Reiki, and even astrology, in order to truly bring a holistic approach to healthcare. With over 15 years working as a kinesiologist in the healthcare system alongside nurses, doctors, physiotherapists, respiratory therapists, dietitians, social workers, and psychologists, she's been able to identify that so many healthcare professionals are empaths, and she has created a new approach to help us support those of us that are supporting others, in order to help us shine our light and our soul's purpose, in order to be able to also embrace our life lessons through how we receive this information and identify the gifts from where the internal struggles are coming from. With the beautiful statement from Kristen, acknowledging that empaths are a special kind of people, and so therefore we also need a special kind of support. So with so much love, Kristen, this is amazing. I cannot wait to dive into what you have to share with us today. And so
I'm excited.
oh, wonderful. I want to just give the floor to you and just say, welcome to the Soul Circle.
Thank you. I'm so appreciative of everybody for having me in this space. And that was such a beautiful opening that you did, Becca. It felt really nice to be able to receive that.
So I wanted to just definitely start to touch into this because obviously, as someone who's been within the healthcare profession, you definitely have also had your own experiences. And I would be curious about your journey. What brought you to this passion for being able to help support those that are supporting others?
Oh man, where do we start with that? That's a big question, Becca. You know that for me. Wow. So when I'll go back to just like pre-pandemic even, I had done everything in my life to get to where I was in my career. Every next step made sense. But anybody who's gone through their early 40s knows that this is a time where your identity is completely shifting. And so that's really what happened to me was this experience of having accomplished everything in my career that I had wanted to accomplish, but my soul was calling me to do something different or to do something more. And I didn't understand at the time why I was feeling so depleted in the work that I was doing. I was having a hard time getting out of bed in the morning. When work was done, I didn't have energy for myself. Like I didn't feel like going to the gym. I was grabbing food to go instead of cooking healthy meals at home. And as a healthcare worker, we know better. Like we know all the things we're supposed to do to be healthy. But what I've learned is that forcing our way to eating, exercising, and cheering our way to health isn't working. There's deeper things going on. And especially as an empath, we take on so much energy from others. And the reason I say that empaths are a special kind of people and a special kind of support is that only about 20% of the population is considered empathic. So when we think about the 80% of the people who aren't, they have these natural set of boundaries that when we try to describe what's going on with us, they just have no clue what we're talking about. And it can be hard to reach out for support. Because not being understood, not being heard, not being felt, not being seen just adds to the trauma of what we're already going through. And so where I'm kind of going with that is that for myself as a healthcare worker, I was actually very lucky. What was confusing me was that I had a job I enjoyed. I had supportive coworkers, whereas a lot of people in healthcare are working in toxic work environments. They're physically and mentally exhausted because of how much has been asked of people, especially over these past couple of years. So there's the group of healthcare workers that have been through it, and it's very obvious of all of the increased responsibilities, tasks being asked of them, working 12-hour shifts, physical shifts, like that can be understood in a way. And I'll talk about that a little bit more too. But for myself, what I wasn't understanding was that I'm in a job I enjoy, I'm being of service to others, I'm not overworked, so I wasn't understanding why I felt so depleted and tired and burnt out. And then when I was still at my old job, we actually had a presentation by a fellow named Dr. David LaPen. And I can send you the link to this article because it really shifted, that you can share with the group. It really shifted how I was seeing what was causing my own depletion. And what he talks about in this article, he wrote it in 2020 when the pandemic was just starting. We thought it was the peak of the pandemic, but there was so much more to come after that. He wrote it about that time, and he was saying that there's a difference between fatigue and depletion. And how he describes this is that fatigue is when we're physically and mentally exhausted. So the physical work that we're doing throughout the day and leaves us feeling physically tired. The mental work that we have to do of, things are shifting every day, things are changing. We're having to keep up with things mentally, figure out problems, come up with solutions, things like this. So with fatigue, we can start to feel tired. And what happens with fatigue is that when we take a day or two off, or we take a week off, we go on vacation, we come back feeling refreshed because we had that rest. And rest is when we are not doing anything. So that act of not doing restores our energy and we're good to go again. However, we've been treating depletion as if it's fatigue. And he describes depletion, on the other hand, as being a lack of input. And so what he describes with depletion is it's more about our intellectual, emotional, and spiritual nourishing of the body. So if we think of our body as a container, we need intellectual, emotional, and spiritual input to fill up our energy and to fill up our container. And it's when our container is full and overflowing that we have energy to give to others. However, what has been happening is that when the pandemic hit and we went into lockdown, our intellectual, emotional, and spiritual fulfillment, we weren't able to connect with others. We weren't able to go out and do the things that we normally would do. And I think as empaths as well, even aside from lockdown, we take on so much energy and we're giving so much of others that we might not be keeping up with the input that we need in order to keep that container overflowing with energy to give. And so what happens is that we're so giving of our energy because you see that people are suffering and you know that your soul is here to help. We give, but we're not getting enough input to fill ourselves back up again. So we take vacation thinking that that's going to help, thinking that rest is going to help, but it doesn't. We come back a month. I took 5 weeks off of work and went to Hawaii and came back just as exhausted as I was before I left. And so that was obviously pre-pandemic. And so this was the confusing piece for me, that I'm resting, I took vacation, I went to this beautiful place, but I'm just not feeling fulfilled. And so for myself, it was this lack of spiritual fulfillment. I was in a job that wasn't nourishing what my soul had come here to do. And so I actually ended up leaving my job. It's been about 1.5 years now. Becca knows this journey because she's been one of the key people helping me through it. But I learned that I have to start filling my own cup up again. And it's really been a journey of figuring out how to do that and where to go with it. So things that can help with depletion, though, are Again, it's an active state of doing as opposed to a passive state. So if you're finding that you're in this place of depletion, what we're needing to do is actively take steps to fill our cup up again. And with empaths, there's two sides to this. One is we need to start restoring our energy and filling our cup back up. The other is we need to see where our energy is leaking, where it's not serving us anymore. And this can show up in lots of different ways, but where are we giving our energy or spending our energy when we just don't really have it to spend? And so we could do a whole other talk on that, but that really comes down to boundaries, which is really a skill that needs to be learned. And we can talk, I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later on too.
Oh, this is amazing. Something that you brought up that I actually want to bring forward again is this whole idea of fatigue versus depletion. And one of the things that we kind of understand, and I would maybe love for you to expand on this a little bit, is that we understand, there's a couple things in here that
There's lots in there, Becca.
that as sensitives or empaths or starseeds or light workers, that we are not the majority of the planet. And it's interesting because we actually just had a conversation about this on our group Telegram about how the majority of the planet is actually operating from basically what we might call consensus thinking, or through kind of more embedded thinking of how maybe the program or belief systems are going. And so therefore, even though it might be like, oh, well, isn't everyone empathic? Doesn't everyone have these feelings? Doesn't everyone feel and absorb what everybody's going through? Is no. And so the idea of fatigue, of like going on vacation to replenish oneself, I think almost all of us can relate to that. I can even relate to that. I too went to Hawaii and came back tired. But I want to talk about depletion. You were talking about how that is signifying that we're not having enough filling us back up. But what comes to mind is that as empaths and as sensitives, I find that we tend to really absorb other people's energy. And how would you say that affects us from even having room to absorb the nourishment that we need?
Oh, interesting. We'll talk about that when we talk about, because you asked how does trauma get laid down in the body, and I think that that's going to be more clear when we go through that. But how I'd answer that right now is that I think it's more of an output than an input. So we're taking on everybody's energy, but it's manifesting in us as output because we're putting energy into feeling everything everybody else is feeling. So I see that more, it's like an input and an output. We're using our inner resources to feel what everybody else is feeling. And so what we need to do is figure out our boundaries around that.
So true.
Yeah. And how we process it and being able to recognize it. So I think one of the first steps is mindfulness, which I'm sure that you do with your group here, is that practice of being present in the moment without judgment. And when we're present in the moment without judgment and we're tracking what's happening in our body, we can notice when that starts to happen, when we're starting to take on something from somebody else. And then we can put tools and practices into place to help to manage that.
Oh, beautiful. Well, if you have the PowerPoint or how you wanted to get into that, I would love to just dive right into that. How it starts to get absorbed into our body, and then how we start to find the ways in which to create those boundaries or learn how to manage the input versus output of what's coming in.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so let's do that. Let's see if I can share. There's a few ways that we can look at this. So we'll go over it in a few different ways. Okay, I think you can see what I'm seeing there.
Oh,
so we talked
perfect.
about the difference between fatigue and depletion. And I'll send the link to that article just so you all have it. You can have a look at it. And my take on burnout is that it's actually a combination of both. People are both fatigued and depleted. So we need to treat both sides of that equation. But it comes down to as well, it's like we're taking on things from others, but many empaths often I know this has been my personal experience, so I'm curious to hear if other people experience this too, is that at empaths, because we're feeling what other people feel, we often have this misplaced sense of responsibility to do something about it. And so I think that changing our perception a little bit, and Becca, you're so great at this in your healing sessions, is that we're sovereign human beings. Other people have the right to their own emotions and their own process. As an empath, just because we're feeling it doesn't mean that we have to do something about it. And I think that is one of the boundaries that we can put up. It's not that we're not here to be compassionate, to be supportive, to be the healers, to be the caregivers and the caretakers. We are, but we need to do it from a place of mindfulness, not from a place of an unconscious pattern that we are just living out. So we'll talk about those unconscious patterns here next.
Oh, that sounds powerful. It is. It's what really stands out is that the permission to actually gauge and start to set up boundaries. It's kind of more like, I feel in so many ways that we need to actually realize we have permission to say no.
Yes, yes, exactly. And so, okay, so we will talk about that too, but I want to talk about this first as the foundation for understanding for this. So I studied a form of somatic psychology called Hakomi, the Hakomi method, that was designed by Ron Kurtz. And he was a psychotherapist back in the 80s. And I believe they opened the school in 1981, which is the year I was born, which is kind of interesting. When I was studying it, I thought the synchronicity of that was kind of cool. But anyways, what he noticed, he didn't actually develop this model per se. What he noticed when he was working with his clients was that when he sat back and just held a safe and compassionate place for his clients to go through their own natural healing system, these were the steps that he noticed that people naturally went through on their own, and also noticed that people can get stuck in each of these areas as well. And so the foundation of the Hakomi method is providing safety to explore what is happening in the present moment in mindfulness with compassionate curiosity. And so it's this idea of compassionate curiosity that allows us to see our shadow side and to bring it up in love and to be held in the light. And so any part of our shadows that we reject of ourselves or we push down, we push away, it creates a false sense of separation within ourselves. And when we are doing healing work, the idea is bringing us back into wholeness so that we can hold both the light and the dark sides of ourselves in love. And this is what brings us back to be whole and to experience everything that it means to be human. And so what he noticed is that the natural healing cycle of the psyche, we all have this cycle naturally built within us, is that what happens during our day as we're just going about day to day, we get clarity on what we need. So the example I'll use is that we wake up in the morning, our mouth is like dry and tastes gross. Everybody's had that morning breath or that morning mouth. So we get clarity that we need to brush our teeth, right? So I'm just using this as a very simple, funny example. We get clarity, we need to brush our teeth. So we go and we brush our teeth, we take an effective action. So we brush our teeth, the action's effective, and we feel satisfied by it. We're nourished by it. We feel good. My mouth is fresh. I can go on with my day. So we feel good. That feeling of being satisfied brings a sense of relaxation to our nervous system. And then when we're relaxed, we get the next moment of clarity. So we start to notice that we're hungry. We feel it in our gut that our hunger signals are calling to us. So we get clarity that we need to have breakfast. We get something to eat. We feel satisfied because now our tummy's full. We can relax. And this cycle keeps on going throughout the day. We continue to get clarity about the next thing that we need. What happens, and this model was developed more so looking at like our early childhood development, right? So parts of this cycle can get interrupted in our early childhood development which then lays down an unconscious pattern with us because it creates a core belief that isn't true. And we keep acting out these core beliefs throughout our life until they come up to the surface to be healed. So using the same example I just had, a less traumatic example, but let's say you wake up in the morning, you have the funky mouth, but you go to the bathroom and you look for your toothpaste and the toothpaste isn't there. You're out of toothpaste. So this causes a little bit of a reaction in our nervous system. I have to go through the whole day with this funky mouth. I'm going to go to work. People are going to smell my breath. It's going to be embarrassing. So it triggers our nervous system a little bit, right? So then we're going through the rest of the day with this triggered nervous system. Because we couldn't take the effective action, we don't get that sense of satisfaction. Because we don't have that sense of satisfaction, we're leaving the house, our mouth still tastes funky, we're embarrassed about our breath. We can't relax. You're going to work, you're like making sure to stay away from people. You don't want people to smell your breath. So we're not going through the day feeling relaxed. And because our nervous system is amped up, we're in this is a very mild example, but we're in this state of maybe fight or flight. We're trying to protect ourselves in some way from this embarrassment of people smelling our breath. When our nervous system is in this heightened state, it's difficult to feel clarity. So you might not have felt that hunger signal that's telling you it's time to have breakfast because you're so in your nervous system state of needing to brush your teeth. So we skip breakfast because we didn't even notice that our tummies were telling us we're hungry. And so we don't have that lack of clarity. We can't take an action. We don't feel satisfied, and it affects the whole system, right?
Wow.
So like I said, we can get stuck at any spot and it just feeds into the rest of the cycle. So same example, we get up, we have clarity that we need to brush our teeth. We go to brush our teeth, but there's no toothpaste there. So we come home after work, we went to the grocery store and they had toothpaste. So we were able to take an effective action. We brought the toothpaste home, but it wasn't the normal toothpaste that we use. It was like a bubblegum flavor instead of mint. So you brush your teeth and your teeth are clean now, but you still don't feel satisfied because it wasn't what you needed. So you got the toothpaste, but it wasn't the kind of toothpaste you needed. So we still get stuck here in satisfaction because even though the mouth is clean, we're still not satisfied because it tasted really gross, the toothpaste we used, right? So again, that goes into the cycle. The other thing that can happen is that we get some satisfaction from brushing our teeth, but then we go to the dentist and the dentist tells us we have a cavity. They're saying, you're not brushing your teeth properly. You need to do things better. So now we're not able to relax. We're flossing our teeth 3 times a day. We're making sure we get into all the crevices. So brushing our teeth all of a sudden doesn't become an act where we feel satisfied. We've been told we're not good enough at doing it. So we get into this hypervigilance mode of I have to be hypervigilant about brushing my teeth. And again, our nervous system is amped up now, so we don't get that sense of clarity. And again, we can see how we can get stuck at different points of this cycle. When we're not relaxed, we don't get feedback from our body about what it is the next thing that we need to do to take action. I hope this is kind of making sense as we go. And if you do have any questions, please let me know.
Can I actually ask this about this? Because as you're saying this, it makes so much sense. It's like, it's almost as though if we miss the first moment of clarity, it throws off the whole cycle. So it's almost as though we start to get more disconnected from our guidance for the signals that are coming maybe from our body, but also maybe from our intuition and our guidance that's coming through. And as we start to listen, it starts to open up that channel to where now we take the effective action in order to feel the satisfaction of that energy flowing. And one of the vibrations that actually comes through with this is this feels like a key reason why we potentially eat the things that we're not supposed or that we don't want to. I don't want to say not supposed to, but that it's almost kind of like that sense of satisfaction. It's like, oh, I know what my body's telling me I want to eat. I'm going to take effective action. I don't have time, so I'm just going to grab this. So satisfaction never comes. So there's almost a sense of still wanting or hunger or not being fulfilled. that
Mm-hmm.
then doesn't create a relaxation. And in this, even the clarity that I want to even bring forward with food, and this is just a topic that comes up with so many people, almost as though the feeling of uncontrolled eating, feeling as though one is in feeling satisfied by what
Mm-hmm.
one is eating, or just mindless eating. And that a lot of times I think even this might even come from that the clarity was that the body is depleted and needs rest or to be fulfilled by something more on a spiritual level. But the effective action is to potentially fill it with something material
Mm-hmm.
rather than
Yeah,
spiritual.
exactly. So we can get stuck at effective action where we're actually not taking the effective action. So we call this a response barrier. We get clarity about what we need. We need nourishment, but maybe the type of nourishment we need is spiritual nourishment, but we're reaching out to food instead because maybe that spiritual nourishment isn't available. Where I see this happen kind of along the same lines that you're talking about, Becca, is that we can start to develop a belief in this satisfaction stage. We call it a nourishment barrier here, where the early childhood trauma might be that you reached out for a hug and didn't receive it. So we create a core belief, I'm not worthy of hugs. So we turn to food instead of turning to people to get that nourishment, because the thing that happens with high fat foods and sugary foods, we get the same neurochemical response that we would if we had a hug. So when we have a core belief that reaching out for hugs or reaching out for interpersonal connection is dangerous or not safe, we look, that would be the effective action. We look for other actions that maybe aren't as effective to get that same kind of nourishment. So it's really the endorphins that we're looking for from the hug, the love, the nourishment. But if that's not available from people, the next best thing that just gives us a really quick reward is food. And that can be what happens there as well, I think.
That's beautiful. And that actually, I think, leads in perfectly to where you're probably going, which is why, even though it might seem like spiritual nourishment that we're looking for, our body is our absolute vehicle where we receive and feel all of this because of those chemical responses. So,
Mm-hmm.
yes, this
So,
is
and then if we even go back further, this is where I get caught sometimes, because trying to get that spiritual nourishment when we're in the state of, I need to feel spirit, I need to feel spirit, I need to feel spirit. We're not in a relaxed state. We're in this hyper vigilant. Was that spirit? Was that not spirit? Am I feeling it? Am I not feeling it? We're in this hyper vigilant state, which is actually blocking our ability to connect. Does that make sense?
yeah, totally. Oh my God.
Oh man, so funny. Did anybody have questions? I think I saw somebody putting their hand up there.
Weren't you saying though that the cycle can be stopped at any step along the cycle, which then creates the problem with every cycle and the continuing cycles that go on until you then nurture yourself or nourish or replenish yourself on the level that your spirit and body and mind are asking for.
Exactly. You got it.
Okay.
Yeah, you got it. That was a beautiful way of
Okay.
summarizing that, actually. Thank you. We'll talk about that next, actually. So this is the question: what do we do to nourish ourselves at each of these stages, right? So if you find yourself saying things like, I don't know what the answer is, I'm not sure what I need, you most likely are in this clarity barrier. And so the reason we're having a clarity barrier is we always look one step prior, is that we're in this hypervigilant stage of our doing, going. We're not relaxed enough to connect with our body and to get the signals of our body. So the permission, and again, this can come up, there's probably 100 different permissions for each of these, and it's going to be really personal to everybody. But the general sense here is that it's okay to know, sense, and feel the present moment. The reason we have clarity barriers is at some point it wasn't safe to feel everything that we were feeling, or it wasn't safe to be in our body. So for myself, when I was like 6 months, a year old, I don't have a cognitive memory of this, but I fell down the stairs in our house as a child. So I learned at a very young age, even though I don't have a cognitive memory of it, it's not safe to be in a body. Like I almost died falling down the stairs. And so my whole life has been this, it's living that Libra Gemini energy of like, I don't know, is it this, is it that, is it this, is it that, I don't know. It's this state of indecision, right? Has been my healing work to do. So when we find ourselves in this state, we need to know it's okay to know, sense, and feel the present moment. And so your work is going to really be that mindfulness work and tuning into your body and finding a safe way to come back into your body. As we do that, those traumas start to reappear. And that's why it's so important and so helpful to work with others in this work, because having somebody else to hold that safe space for you so that you can be safe as these things start to come up can be really helpful. So clarity barrier, we need to get good at feeling our body to get those cues again. If you're stuck in an action, what it can feel like here is like a state of restlessness or like frustration because you know what you want to do, but for some reason you can't do it. Okay. So you know that you want to leave the house and go to a party, but for some reason you're told you're not allowed to. You have to stay home. Again, you don't get that satisfaction of connecting with your friends, whatever it might be. There's an action you want to take, but you're being held back from taking that action. So the permission you need here is that it's okay to follow your inner impulses and take action. What the early childhood trauma was that you had an impulse or you went to do something and you got in trouble for it, you got punished for it. So you developed a core belief that it's not okay to follow my inner impulses, or what I want to do is wrong. There's a few different kinds of core beliefs that can come up there. So the best thing to do here is to take small steps that feel safe. And you might also just have to learn a new skill. And this is where I think we get stuck as empaths when it comes to setting boundaries. Because when we were young, maybe we wanted to send a boundary, or like we yelled back, or something happened where we tried to set a boundary, but it was overpowered, or we weren't allowed to set the boundary, we got in trouble for it, it wasn't understood, whatever it might be. So we learn a core belief, it's not safe to set boundaries, or I won't be loved if I set boundaries. And so again, when it comes to this as empaths, it's a skill to learn. And what I find is happening in like the personal growth worlds, in the maybe even spiritual growth world sometimes, we're being told to just go out and set a boundary, but nobody's teaching you the skill before you do it. So we prevent ourselves and protect ourselves from setting those boundaries because that fear is so great within us. And this is a good thing. Like there's a reason we're protecting ourselves from this, but we can't expect ourselves to just go out and take the action until our nervous system is settled and we feel safe enough to do it. So there is a layer that we're missing, I think, a lot of the time, is that, well, you need to set a boundary, so just go and set it. It's not that easy. We need to actually build enough safety in our nervous system, enough skill, enough belief in our own self-worth, that we're worth having those boundaries, that we're worth protecting our energy, or being in our own energy. So there's kind of a process that needs to happen before that. So that's the action stage. Yeah. When we go to satisfaction, I gave this example earlier, we get nourishment barriers when we've reached out for love and haven't received it. We reached out, we had emotions, we thought that we were going to be taken care of, they weren't. It's like, you're sensitive, you're too sensitive. How many people have heard that they're too sensitive, or they just need to get over it? I think 80% of the world, they can just get over it and move on. As sensitives, we hold our emotions in our body we hold our emotions in our memory in our body, and it's so strong that a lot of people, they feel their emotion, they move on from it. When you have a lot of water in your chart, which Becca knows, we tend to have those feelings stored in our body as a felt sense forever. All you have to do is remember what happened and all of those emotions start to get stirred up in you again, right? So what we need to learn here, that it's okay to state our needs. And again, this is a skill. Like, we need to learn first that it's safe and how to go about doing this. And to know that, I think the pattern we get stuck in is that we keep reaching out from our needs from people who aren't emotionally available to help us get our needs met. And this is the ineffective action that keeps happening, is that we keep reaching out for love. We keep reaching out for support. We're like, why aren't you being there for me? And we keep thinking we can get this person to just be there for us. We'd feel better, when what we actually need to do is take a more effective action and go somewhere else to get our needs met. Whether it's turning towards ourselves, turning towards source and spirit, turning towards nature, or just finding a group of people that you connect with on a different level. And that's where we start to get that nourishment need met there.
Oh, that's beautiful. That almost makes me kind of think it just sounds almost like the way we might even describe codependency, in that need for constantly being the healer and the helper for others, and constantly seeking that satisfaction of feeling like you made a difference to that person, like they saw you, they received you, they healed or got helped in some way, or vice versa. Would you say that's kind of a common pattern that would happen a lot of times?
I know that was a pattern that hit me like a ton of bricks when I went for counseling, and she's like, you might be codependent. That was a lot to take on at the time that I was processing that all. But it's worth looking into, because that once you realize you're in that pattern, you actually have the power to do something about it. When you don't recognize you're in that pattern, it feels really crummy, and you keep doing the ineffective action, so you never feel satisfied. So I do think as empaths, we are at higher risk of developing codependency, just because it feels so uncomfortable to feel what the other people are feeling. We think the solution is getting them to change so that we can feel better. So we end up in this state where we're constantly trying to help, trying to be the person who's going to say the thing or do the thing to make this other person feel better. Because when they feel better, then I feel better. And that's kind of the pattern of codependency, right? So as empaths, we just need to switch our mindset around that a little bit. The work I really had to do, and this might be different for everybody, but the work I really had to do was that I was so orientated outside of myself to other people, that the work was reorientating into myself, into that clarity space of like, what do I need? What do I want? What are my boundaries? It's okay to speak up and say what my boundaries are. It's okay to have needs. I really had to orientate into myself in order to get a stronger sense of self, that I could be in my own energetic space.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. All right. Last one here. So when we're stuck in relaxation, it's kind of like that example I gave about going to the dentist and saying you have a cavity. It's what you're doing isn't enough. So just to what we were speaking of here, sometimes we end up in this pattern where we have the core belief that if I just did more, if I just showed up more, if I said things differently, we get into this hypervigilant state of, if I just get to the point where I've done enough work, people will see my value. And so the common belief here is that I am not worthy unless I'm doing something. And so you can see how it can be really hard to relax if we think that we need to do, go to be worthy of love. And so the permission here is that it's okay to stop working and to rest. And I think this is where a lot of healthcare workers get caught up as well, is that we're in these environments where you have all these patients that you need to see throughout the day. And in order to be doing a good job in a system that's inherently suffering, you feel like you can never do enough, which then we can take personally that I'm not enough. And that's where the disconnect happens. And that's where we need to shift our core belief a bit. So the permission is that even when you're not doing anything, you're still enough. You're still lovable. You're still exactly what you came here to be, which is just love, right? So that is the permission. If we're in that go, do, I can't stop and rest. If I stop and rest, I start to feel uncomfortable, like I'm not doing enough or I'm not good enough. We need to know that we're good enough even when we're not doing anything. And that's the healing that needs to happen at that place.
You know, that as you're saying that actually really resonates so much. And I just want to tie in a little bit of the astrology and even the human design with that, as you say that, because that's some of the classic energy that we feel from our open centers and our human design rave. That any of the places where we're open in our chart tends to be the places we're absorbing other people's energy, and then the restlessness or that anxiousness of trying to figure out what to do with that energy. And specifically, classically, the open heart center is that energy that constantly feels, oh my gosh, I need to do more. There's more I need to do. If I could do more, then it'll prove to them that I'm good enough. It'll prove that I'm worthy. It'll prove that I am smart or I am lovable. And even the open root center is feeling the pressure of others. So never feeling okay to sit down, because you're constantly feeling other people's energy. And I want to ask just some of because you work with astrology a bit through this when you work with people. And we have a question in here that I thought was really beautiful. That is, oh, there's another one that came through. But it says, it also seems that we might be more mindful to our South Node patterns as versus moving towards the North Node development and potentially staying stuck and continue I hope I'm asking this correctly, but it says we will stay stuck and continue the clarity barrier. So what I think that's asking is that in that phase of getting the clarity, that if we're more still attuned to the comfort of our South Node, do you tend to see that pattern of the South Node versus North Node playing a part in how people are within the cycle of energy flowing?
That's so interesting you said that, Becca, because I actually haven't been doing astrology readings lately. So I can't say that I haven't actually worked with any healthcare workers at this point in time as far as that goes. It's been about over a year since I've done some readings, so I can't recall, but I will speak to my own experience. Was the beautiful thing I think about astrology is it can help provide clarity where you didn't have clarity before. And it can really help with that clarity barrier. And when I learned about my North Node being in Leo, it's interesting we're in Leo energy today. Once I had clarity around that and like the permission to step into the spotlight and to shine, as opposed to like being shy and thinking that my voice wasn't, that nobody wanted to hear my voice or whatever that South Node pattern was. Once I had the clarity and the permission to do that, it helped me to move through that cycle a little bit more that we were just talking about. So I do think that because the North Node is what is not necessarily in our consciousness. Is that right? Would you interpret it that way? Like it's what we don't necessarily know that we need to step into.
And also in a lot of ways, I see North Node for people who are just coming to it. It feels uncomfortable, almost like I can't do that. Oh my gosh, that can't be my life path. That can't be what I'm supposed to do. And so a lot of times the North Node feels like going into the unknown and uncharted territory of vulnerability even.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. That's amazing.
May I ask another question?
Yeah.
There's another one that came through here, and I think it's going to tie into one I wanted to bring forward. It says, I have problems with boundaries because it seems that it reinforces the idea of separation. And it seems that at the present time, it's about returning to the truth of oneness, not enforcing the belief in I am separate from you. And I'm going to draw a line here and set a boundary where this is this and not allowing it into my space. So that's a beautiful question. How would you work with that energy?
I love this question. And I do think that once I started learning more about boundaries, they weren't what I thought they were. Because I think the reason I had a hard time setting boundaries before having boundaries was I thought that it was exactly that. It's like putting up a wall and being like, no, you're like, the feeling that I always got was that you're not worthy of love. And that was the message I felt like I was putting out there by saying no. And I could feel the rejection that would happen then. And then that would be what would prevent me from, because I am a lovable person. I do love you. I'm not saying no because I don't love you. You are worthy of love. So yes, I get that there's that wall that can feel like it goes up when we're thinking about boundaries. What I will say to that is two things. So the first thing is that I took a course with a fellow named Jeffrey Allen, and he teaches a course called Duality, and that's on a platform called Mind Valley. And I just want to give him credit of this because that's where I learned this from. He looks at things a little bit differently. And he talks about this idea of a permission rose instead of a boundary. And I love this idea because I do think we've gone too far down the path, especially in these spiritual worlds, of needing to protect ourselves. And I think that this need to say, like, I have to put up barriers and protect myself is inherently saying the world's not safe, you're wrong, I'm right, I need to protect myself. And it is feeding into whoever mentioned that comment earlier, it's feeding into this sense of separation, right? And so when he presents the idea of this permission rose, it's still honoring each of us as a sovereign, energetic human being. So I am allowed to have my space. So we're looking at this more as permission. So I have the permission to just be me within my auric boundary. And you have permission to be you. The rest of the world has permission to be whatever the rest of the world or the rest of the universe wants to be outside of my energetic space. But within my energetic space, this is my energy. This is the vibration that I'm choosing to hold, and that I have permission to have this little piece of the universe all to myself. The rest of the universe has permission to be whatever it wants to be. And so I can lead everybody through a meditation later, because I think for some people, the meditation can really help with this. For myself, I'm more of like an intellectual kind of mental person. And so what I found that even going out into the world, having this mental picture of this permission rose can be a really helpful tool to use when you're in the space with somebody who's vibrating at a vibration or is having emotions or a problem or is coming at you in some way. The visual here is that you imagine a rose halfway between you and the other person. And this rose, it can be adjusted. It can come closer to you. It can go further away from you, but essentially it's going to sit between you and the other person. So if you're in the presence of somebody who feels angry, they have the permission to their anger, but you have the permission to your peace. So you get to just mentally or energetically either allow that anger into your space or to allow it to stay on the other side of your space and to stay outside of your auric field. And what this does, what I thought the beauty of this was, is it allows us as empaths to stay in our peaceful state, to stay in our sense of groundedness, to stay in our vibration of love, in the presence of what would feel maybe to not be love, for example, or whatever the trigger, the humanity is outside of us. And then the same thing goes if you're with somebody and they come to you and they're smiling and their heart is open, they have this beautiful energy to share with you. You have this permission rose, so you can feel that energy vibrating. And if you want to bring it into your space because it's going to lift you up, then you have permission to bring that energy into your space. So it's from this perspective, it's not that like, I need to protect myself from you because you're wrong and I'm right and you're bad and I'm good. Like, I do believe that that sense of mentality is causing more separation, and it's making it more difficult for us, especially as empaths, to have those boundaries. When it does come to having boundaries in other ways, the other ways that I learned to learn what I needed for my boundaries, for example, was if I'm going to a gathering, I do get drained when I'm in other people's energy for too long. So I'm allowed, if everybody else is hanging out for 6 hours, I can give myself permission to leave 2 hours into the event. And that to me is a boundary. It's not putting up this separation of like, you're bad, I'm good, whatever that might be, that energy. But you have the boundary to say, I'm not going to stay here for 6 hours, because if I do, I know I'm going to leave completely depleted. I'm going to come, I'm going to connect with you, but I need to leave 2 hours in, because I know that's what I need to do to nourish myself. If you think about a boundary more as giving yourself permission to nourish yourself than to putting up some kind of block or barrier between you and another person, if you come at it from my nourishment is just as important as your nourishment. The other learning, I'm sorry, I know I'm sharing a lot of information right now, but the other learning that I took from my Hakomi training was our instructor kept saying, you should never make yourself sick to make somebody else healthy. And this has stuck with me, and I'll say it again. You are not required to make yourself sick to make someone else healthy. And this is where it comes back to, I know, Becca, you talk about this a lot, as being sovereign, energetic human beings, is that other person has a higher self that can guide them. You don't have to be the person to make yourself sick to help that person. That person's on their own journey. They have their own higher self that's going to guide them through that. And if it's going to make you sick to open up your energy to them, you're not the only, there's 8 billion people in this world. You are not the only person that is available to help them. They'll find another path.
Oh, that is incredible. You know, just to be able to have that permission. And I love that it's the visual of the permission rose, because we've been working a lot with the energy of the sacred rose energy and the sacred divine feminine energy of the order of the rose, or the initiations of the rose, which really symbolize a very sacred energy. And I want to almost tie this into the idea of the temple and our inner temple, and starting to start to reframe ourselves outside of all of this unworthiness that we felt, or that I have to give more. Or you made a comment that is really special, which was, a lot of times if we think we're setting up boundaries, we will feel as though we're hurting someone else's feelings. And then, of course, as an empath, you feel that hurt. You think you're making someone else feel. And so then you wouldn't want to do that, because you're empathically taking on that pain also. But the idea of the temple, almost that permission rose, makes me think of that when we get to start to honor our body as a temple or as our home, we can now start to shift our mind frame to the idea of, imagine your home in your house. It's your house. It's your sacred place. And if we started to let people and energy into our home the way that we let energy into our body and into our emotions, I think we would completely change our perception of boundaries. Because I could say, even being incredibly empathic, if somebody just barges into your home and starts moving their stuff in and dumping their crap in your home and antagonizing the energy within your home, I could feel that we would be like, no, I do not consent. How do you feel about that, as far as even being able to see our body as our temple, or as our home?
I love that. That actually kind of gives me goosebumps a little bit. I feel that in my heart when you say that. Because you're right. If somebody came into my home, they had muddy boots and they started walking all over my carpets, I'd be like, heck, get out of my house. You're not allowed to do that. And that would be okay, right? Like, we can justify it in that way. I think as empaths, because we have these core beliefs in our shadows that we are only worthy if we're helping other people, or we're bad if something we say triggers somebody else. I think this is where I was getting stuck, because in the spiritual world, we do so much work with boundaries in energy. But for me, when I had to actually learn, it was my perception and how I was thinking and some of my core beliefs that needed to shift. That's really what started helping me understand it in a different way. So looking at things more from also that core belief of, why are we thinking that way? The thing that came up for me when I was going through this was that I believe that I was the cause of this person's reaction. that I was the one causing the pain in them. But their reaction is their responsibility. And so if it triggers something in them, it's their learning as well of whatever it is that's coming up for them. I'm almost doing them a disservice of not setting my boundary, because they're not learning the lesson they need to learn then as well. So there might be a lesson for that person that they have to self-reflect on, which is why they're getting triggered. If they weren't in some kind of pain, they wouldn't be getting triggered either, right? So, but it's in our like the beauty of our triggers is that it brings mindfulness to what hasn't been healed yet. And I think sometimes we try to avoid our triggers, but when you can lean into them and create a sense of mindfulness around them and ask, this is where I go on the lessons, like, what is this trigger teaching me? And, when we're on the path where we're doing that work, whereas a lot of people that we're trying to protect, they might not be in that place of seeing things that way. And so I think we try to protect them from feeling their triggers, but we're actually doing them a disservice, if that makes sense. Do you follow that?
Absolutely. And you know what? I want to come back to these questions too. There's a couple questions coming in on the chat. But this leads me into perfectly bringing back the awareness of how we lock these things within our body. How are we absorbing them? How are they staying stuck within either our body, our fascia? You also brought the awareness of maybe those of us with more water signs even kind of hold it even a little bit more on multiple archetypal levels within our psyche. And so now as we start to imagine this energy that we're holding and it's being held within our memory, so therefore, as you're saying, comes forward in triggers, what are some tools you would recommend for us to gently be able to address these places that are coming forward to be healed or to come into balance within our body?
Awesome. The first practice we can have is mindfulness, and not just mindfulness and meditation, which often just takes us up into our upper three chakras. We need to do mindfulness that brings us into our lower three chakras and into our body as well. So doing mindfulness types of meditations that actually connect us into the felt sense in our body, that can be where we can start to bring into our awareness. Our body remembers everything that our conscious mind doesn't remember. So a lot of those pains that we feel, even if we don't have a conscious memory in the frontal cortex of our brain, it's been stored. Neuroscientists will say it's stored at another part of the brain, but in the fascia world, in the world of fascia is so interesting. They're looking at how we actually physically store memory in our body as well, separate from our nervous system. And so doing fascia release work can actually be really helpful in gently releasing some of these stored patterns that we have in our body as well. I can talk about that a little bit more because I find it so interesting. I'm not well versed enough in the physiology of fascia, and there is a lot of research out there in the physiology of fascia now. But in its most simplest form, how I like to describe it to people is that we know that our body is about 70% water, right? We hear this a lot, but to actually imagine our body as like your container is 70% water, it's hard to wrap our mind around. So what they're finding is that when we drink our water and it gets absorbed into our body, it's not actually stored in our body as H2O, the liquid form of water. What they believe is happening, which is so interesting, as astro junkies, they find this interesting. What their theory is right now is that as the water goes into our cells, it spirals. Just like the universe is spiraling, it spirals into our cells. And so as H2O spirals into our cells, it changes form from H2O to H3O2, which is a crystalline liquid form of water. And so there is the research coming forward that our bodies are liquid crystal. And so just like a crystal stores information, our bodies store information in the same way that crystals would store information. And so what happens when we have trauma, when we can't complete that cycle, so we talked about the cycle of the psyche, But the body goes through transformation when we have trauma as well, where we wanted to punch or we wanted to run or we needed to shake things off. But our mind said, you're going to be crazy if you do that, don't do that. So we freeze in that moment instead. So that frozen memory gets stored in this liquid crystalline matrix within our body. And the fascia, the ground substance of the fascia, changes from its liquid form into a more solid form. And this is where we get fascia restrictions. So an example would be, you know, when we've had trauma to our heart's been broken, our heart's been hurt. What kind of posture do we don't walk around in the world like this when we're sad. We walk around in the world, we naturally go in like this. So we start to create hardened forms of fascia where it's not its liquid crystal form anymore. It's a hardened form of fascia. So now when I go to move my shoulder, this is where we get pain in our body, is because we're trying to move, but because there's a restriction here, I don't have my full range of motion anymore. So I'm moving from a different part of my body now because this has been restricted. And so in nature, when a crystal, I have a crystal here, when a crystal is put under pressure in nature and there's pressure in this crystal, it causes what's called a piezoelectric response, which causes the electrons to start moving through the crystal. And crystal is turned into its liquid form through pressure. So this is the same thing that we do with myofascial release. And I don't think I have my little balls around. No, I don't. So what I do is there's these little 4-inch balls you can just get from the dollar store that have a bit of a squish. Anybody can do this. It's super easy. You just take the ball, you lay on your stomach, for example, if you're working on a restriction here, and it's the pressure, the gentle pressure of the ball that we put into the fascia tissue that starts to create this piezoelectric response that changes it from its hardened form of crystal back into its liquid form of crystal again. And as it does that, what has happened, I haven't had this happen when I've been doing it on myself. I have had it happen when I've gone for manual fascia release, is that if we have a stored memory attached to the reason why this happened in the first place, when that starts to release and open, sometimes that can trigger that emotion that comes up to be cleared. And I think this can happen in a lot of different ways. We can do this with a more like physical manual response, but I know I've had fascia releases just in doing meditations and stuff too. So I do think it can happen in lots of different ways. But the myofascial release work we are so behind in Western medicine here on this. I think there's just some kind of block in our expansion of consciousness around it. Europe's doing a better job with it, I think, but it's a missing form of medicine right now. And it's so interesting to learn more about. We need to update our training on anatomy. I never thought anatomy would change. I had my old anatomy textbook. I'm like, this is very straightforward. Anatomy is never going to change. But once I started learning about the fascia, we were just told that fascia was an insulator in the body because fascia was studied on cadavers. So it was studied on a body that did not have a consciousness living in it. It was studied on a body that didn't have a soul inside of it. So what they do in fascial research now is they take a camera and they put a camera up into a live body, and they've been able to see how fascia responds to movement and to these fascial release techniques in a living body, which is so much different than studying a cadaver.
You're blowing my mind. This is so amazing. Fascia has been something I've been fascinated with for a very long time, the myofascial release. I have personally had many experiences on a table having body work done where I've had floods of memories be released from the body through these types of sessions, and to be able to sometimes cathartically through even tears coming, or even overwhelm of anger coming up at different times, as that starts to release within the body. But you're tying in on the piezoelectrical crystalline energy in there really amplifies for us. We really work a lot understanding a little bit more the piezoelectrical compression that happens within our pineal gland, and how that opens up the stargate for us to move through dimensions, move through perception. But now really seeing it, how it's tied in through the entire body, because fascia is really one of the record keepers within our body. And I love it. Have you, like, this ties into that even, it's quite an old book that was out there, but it was called Anatomy Trains. And it showed how our fascia is interwoven, not only through every fiber, but then through every fiber bundle, then through every fiber, like every muscle, and then through every organ. And it's intertwined between absolutely every little bit of our body. And that this book Anatomy Trains was so just fascinating, because it was like, oh, you could touch this place on the bottom of your foot and it'll show you exactly how it intertwines all the way up to maybe somewhere in your shoulder. You know.
It's the example I love to give with that is it's like a spider web. So if you imagine a spider web and you tug on one area, it sends information to the entire web, right? Because there's no beginning and end to our fascia system. It is a continuous system. There's no beginning and end to it. It's all interconnected. So in our traditional training in healthcare, we've been taught that the nervous system is the be all and end all of communication in our body. And the fascia system actually transmits communication faster through the body than the nervous system does. And so John F. Barnes was the person that I learned fascia theory from. And his belief is that our consciousness lives in our fascia system. And the reason this makes sense to me is because as they study fascia, it can transmit photons and light energy through our body. So when we think of us being light beings, that light transmits that energy. Like, I think there's so many layers to this that we haven't even begun to uncover yet. We keep trying to study so much about our physical form that I believe that it's our consciousness that is holding these patterns more. It's just manifesting in our physical body, if that makes sense.
Well, this is such an expansion in how we can start to see in a clearer, even more physical level, how our body is a biocomputer, and how we interface through our consciousness as an organism within the universe. And I actually want to ask this question. There's a question here in the chat. There's a lot of amazing statements coming through here. It says, one question related to reading of the soul records. So this would be maybe doing intuitive work, downloading information from the Akashic records. They're saying, I get information by feeling the soul stories. It literally all goes through me. And the question is there a better way of doing that? Or how do you feel that that might be actually utilizing the body as a way to read the records? Like, what would your thoughts be?
Oh man, that's beautiful. I think everybody's intuition works differently. I'm definitely one that feels things in my body when it comes to my intuition, if I'm doing any kind of intuitive work. I would say everybody's intuition works differently, but our body is the felt sense of our humanity, right? It's where we feel our emotions. It's where it's how we experience this physical world is through our body. So I think, yeah, being able to be in your body to read that information is amazing.
And as you I know you're saying doing like myofascial release work, or even even as you're saying it with the compression on the energy, in order to, this would kind of make me think of energy work, or even like placing pressure upon these places with intention to maybe breathe. Because I know when we do breath work, what we're doing is we're compressing the light streams through us and into areas of our body in order to do compression into the piezoelectrical crystals in our body in order to activate those centers. So, say maybe someone is doing Akashic readings for others, doing healing work for others. Inevitably, we still take on stuff no matter what. It's processing through our body. How would you potentially maybe suggest some ideas to help after that session to come back into that wholeness?
What comes to me first when you say that is to tune into your body and see what its impulse is. So if you ask your body, what do you need right now? Or what do I need, to allow your body to have that. So you might need to do some weird like movement to move the energy through you. In myofascial release, we call that unwinding, because we might hold a pattern that we've taken on from somebody that we've done the reading for. And our body has a natural way of resetting that. It's just our mind tells us that looks strange and you don't want to look strange, so don't do it. So if we can override that or put our mind kind of to the side for a little bit and just allow your body to naturally find how it wants to move, that can help to release some of that holding pattern that you might take on from others, as well as like our typical using our mind to clear. But when you just go into meditation to clear energy, that's obviously very helpful. But that's just another tool, I guess, would be to allow the body to move in whatever way it wants to move to clear that energy as well. Movement is a form of myofascial release too.
I 100% agree with that. I think that a lot of times we get so into kind of maybe moving through the dimensions or working with energy, or even for the left, when the left side of the brain comes in, we get, very logical with things, and that a lot of times we will get stuck in our head or stuck in our body. So I would agree, movement is like, get up, start dancing.
Mm-hmm.
Let the
Exactly.
body like,
Shake it out, shake it
wiggle
off.
it out. I do want to ask this one, because I think this is actually going to lead into a topic. Maybe we can go into it another time, of the cranial sacral energy. But it says, this is fascinating. I was pondering, if we reset the cycle of the nervous system, if you need to return to each memory in the spiral of time for complete healing of trauma. So I think this is asking if we actually have the ability to go in and heal the nervous system. Would we need to go back and undo the spiral? And this kind of begs a question, because I would almost think the nervous system is actually responding off of the fascia and the cerebral spinal fluid. What is your take on it?
I think it's both. Like, again, we're a holistic system, so every system is working in collaboration with every other system in our body. Let me think about that for a second. So when I did Hakomi work, the idea was that once you go back to the original wound and reset the original wound, that it would have a ripple effect on everything, because you've experienced, the thing about resetting the nervous system is that you have a new felt experience of the same stimulus or input. And so you've rewired your nervous system. So any time that pattern comes up again, you just have a new felt response to it. So you're not reacting to it anymore. You can actually just respond. We know we've healed something when we have a neutral response to the same trigger, right? So there is a sense of resetting the nervous system with that. And the nervous system is embedded, obviously, in our fascia system as well. I don't know where else to go with that, Becca. I think that it all impacts everything else, right? And there's one thing that we did learn in fascia research is that there's more than one road to Rome. I think that's the expression, or all roads lead to Rome. I like to think of it like a tangled up set of Christmas lights. You start to untangle one knot and then you untangle the other knot, but no set of tangled Christmas lights is exactly the same. So every person is going to be different. There's no linear process to healing. It's a completely non-linear process. But eventually, once you untangle and you go through all the ups and downs and twists and turns, you get to a place where the nervous system, the fascia system, just feels settled again. I don't know if we ever live in a body where all of our fascia restrictions are released. I don't know if that ever happens. Maybe that does at some point, but it's a practice. This is why I like to think of it as a practice. There's no linear way to heal. It's about putting the practices in place to allow us to learn the lessons throughout life as we go. Everything happens in spirals and layers. And so it's just about the next layer and the next layer and the next layer. I don't know if there's any end to that journey.
That's so perfect. I have that same impression, you know, the more and more that we delve into the work and we keep exploring and understanding more, that I feel as long as we are consciousness within this physical form, we will always be a catalyst for being a way to heal, not only within ourselves, but then we start to be able to move energy through a body that's potentially healing stored energy on the planet, stored energy within many quantum different family trees, if you will. So, you know, I think this has been so helpful, Kristen. I'm so grateful that you were able to come on and share this information. Just definitely given me so much more to think about. I absolutely love just having this wisdom for us to work with, to add with everything else, so that we can continue to keep health within our body, so that we can be the healers. We can, you know, and I use that word, we know we are just being the energy that is a catalyst for others to be healers within their own form. But within this, that we get to live that purpose of being the compassionate beings. And I love the word you used earlier, which is compassionate, or curiosity, I believe you used, which I thought was really beautiful. So within this, I know we're coming to time. I would just love to even have you on again at some point, because there's just so much wisdom. How can other people find you if people wanted to connect with you, to work with you? How could people reach out to you?
Yeah, what you can do, Becca, is just share with people maybe like my website and my email address. I am still in this like identity shift of not knowing exactly where my business is going right now, to be honest with you, but I'm happy to do consults with people. So if something spoke to you and you just want to reach out and chat with me for half an hour, we can figure out what you're looking for and how I can help and figure that out. I don't have individual sessions listed on my website right now, but I am, especially for your group, open to just do like a 1 hour session with people, so they can reach out to me if they're interested in booking that.
Oh,
Thank
you
you for
are
having me
amazing.
here, though. It's been so amazing.
Likewise. Oh my gosh, my heart is just overwhelming. I just absolutely love the elevation that we've all taken with this conversation. And I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for being you, for having the courage to shine your light and to speak that light forth for all of us, so we can embed it into our knowledge, our wisdom, free the fascia in our body. So thank you, Kristen.
Free the fascia. I love that. So amazing.